This is the first time that we have paused to honor the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we have a distinguished panel with us, and we want this to be the first of many opportunities for us to be more aware of the history that all of us share, for good as well as for ill. My name's Todd Lake, and I have a particular interest in the subject of the Holocaust. I was a German studies major at Harvard, studied a year at the University of Munich, and had an opportunity to both study as well as visit sites that were significant, in particular in the beginnings of 19th century anti-Semitism in Germany, and then the beginnings of the Nazi Party, which some of you may well know was very much rooted in Munich, where I was studying. And I'm old enough, I was over there in 1980, that I not only got to spend time with victims of the Holocaust, but also with those who went into what was called the inner exile. They did not overtly protest the Nazi regime, neither were they active collaborators in it. They would go out of their way as students at the University of Munich to go way around where the Denkmal, the monument to the 1923 putsch was, so they would not have to give the Heil Hitler salute. So in little ways, they tried to show their disapproval. But you may know that at the University of Munich, there is also a group of students known as the White Rose. Are you talking about that? Good, okay. Because he would correct me rightly at every turn. He's a real scholar. But the White Rose, and this was a group of students, very small, brothers in the army fighting in the troops during World War II, who realized that Hitler was evil incarnate, and bravely began to protest overtly by distributing leaflets. This was, as you can suspect, utterly illegal in Nazi Germany, which was a totalitarian state, second to none, and they were immediately arrested, and they were then brought to Gestapo headquarters, interrogated, and in short order executed, along with Professor Huber. The rest of the story is not too many years ago, the transcripts of those interrogations were found, and I would strongly commend to you the movie Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl. It's in German with subtitles. All the dialogue you'll hear between her Gestapo interrogators and Sophie Scholl is absolutely from the transcripts. And she is brilliant, she is brave, she is fearless, and at one point in the movie, her mother contacts her and says, you must relent. And she says, "Mother, Jesus is with me. I have nothing to fear." And she's executed just a few days later. And she is one of the righteous Gentiles of the Holocaust. We wish that this were a historical meeting, that anti-Semitism had vanished from the earth with the destruction of the Nazi regime. I'm going to read to you just a couple of lines from a recent article, just from last week in the Christian Century magazine. The Anti-Defamation League is reporting a 57% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States between 2016 and 2017. That is over almost a two-thirds increase in just 1 year. This is the highest tally of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States since records have been kept in the last few decades. Anti-Semitic incidents last year totaled nearly 2,000, up from just a little over 1,200 the year before. The Anti-Defamation League says that there were 952 vandalism incidents, an increase of 86%, over 1,000 incidents of harassment, and 163 bomb threats. Anti-Semitic incidents at universities nearly doubled for the second year in a row. So 2 years in a row, it's doubled. So we're talking about not geometric increase, not arithmetic increase, but geometrically increasing on college campuses, with almost 500 incidents reported last year. We all know about what happened in Charlottesville, the murder of Heather Heyer, the neo-Nazis marching arm in arm with the Klan and with the skinheads. Also happened down here in Shelbyville. My wife, I was out of town, unfortunately, in Los Angeles. My wife went down to be part of the protest in Murfreesboro as the skinheads, the neo-Nazis threatened to show up there as well. This is here. This is something that we need to think about. The motto of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is never again. We need to be vigilant. And today we have with us 4 people who are going to help us do just that. They'll speak in the order that I'll introduce them, so I'll do all the introductions, and then one by one they'll come to the microphone, take about 15 minutes to talk from their unique angle of vision, and then all 4 will sit at the table, and we'll have about a half hour with them to have conversation and dialogue and interaction. Dr. Helmut Walter Smith is the Martha Rivers Ingram Chair of History and Professor of German Studies at Vanderbilt. He's the author of a wide range of books. I'll let you know a few of them. German Nationalism and Religious Conflict, number of edited collections, the Oxford Handbook of Modern German History, very interesting book this, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews in Germany, 1800 to 1914. He authored a book entitled The Holocaust and Other Genocides, History, Representation, and Ethics, co-authored Exclusionary Violence, Anti-Semitic Riots in Modern German History. One of his most recent books is The Butcher's Tale, Murder and Anti-Semitism in a German Town, which received the Frankel Prize in Contemporary History. We have a world-class scholar with us to kick us off. Rabbi Saul Strasberg is a good friend. He was on campus yesterday. We had the luncheon for the folks who oversee the transportation for the Room in the Inn ministry every Wednesday and Friday night. We host homeless on campus. It's the Jewish community that, for reasons you understand, on Wednesday nights brings homeless guests to our campus, and Rabbi Saul heads up that initiative. He has been Shereth Israel's spiritual leader since 2005. He has a degree from Yeshiva University and attended Hebrew University and another university in Jerusalem. I studied Hebrew in seminary and have forgot just about as much as I learned, sadly. An experienced musician, Rabbi Strasberg played in Jewish wedding bands while living in New York. He serves on the steering committee for the International Rabbinic Fellowship and has recently founded JMS Nashville, our city's new, and I would gather first, perhaps? First Jewish middle school. Way to go. Rabbi Mark Shifton arrived at the temple, Congregation Ohabai Shalom, in 1999 from the historic urban congregation in San Jose, California, known as Temple Emmanuel. Rabbi Shifton received his Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude, from San Francisco State University. Hebrew Union College of Los Angeles awarded Rabbi Shifton the Master of Arts in Hebrew Letters, and he was ordained at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's also a friend of Belmont. He has spoken on campus to our students at my invitation. Very graciously, he invited Dr. Fisher to speak on Yom Kippur, one of the high holy days at the temple. So he is a real friend to Belmont. And finally, Lori Cardozo-Moore is a recipient of the Friend of Israel Award by the Center for Jewish Awareness and the Goodwill Ambassador to Israel Award given by Israel Consul General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. In 2005, she founded Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, where she served as president, guiding the work of supporting Israel and addressing the rise of incidents of anti-Semitism both on U.S. campuses and abroad. Proclaiming Justice to the Nations has released several films, including The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust, which examines the roots of anti-Semitism, the rise of Nazi Germany, the horrors of the Holocaust, and the birth of the new anti-Semitism. So we have with us a panel second to none to help us think together about these very important issues. Let's give a very warm Belmont welcome to Dr. Smith.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I live down the street. I've been watching the exciting expansion of Belmont for many years, and it's an honor to be here. It's also an honor to be here on Holocaust Remembrance Day. We are also celebrating is not the right word, remembering another marker, and that is that 2018 represents the 80th anniversary of the November pogrom, or Crystal Night. I would like to use the November pogrom, or Crystal Night, to reflect on the origins and the meaning of the Holocaust. As Todd so eloquently and nicely put it, I'm a historian. I write books. I also pursue work in digital humanities. Digital humanities, that already sounds rather fancy. What I really do is I map things. And from points, I start thinking, imagining, and then researching. Now, as you all know, each place on Earth has a point, a latitude and a longitude. I use these points to start thinking or imagining beyond the cliches that are sometimes embedded in very large categories, like Americans, or Germans, or Jews. Points on a map force us to the local, and they force us to count each and every place. Let me show you the first map. This is a map of Crystal Night, November 9th, one evening. The SA, helped by many German people, towns, many local mayors, many town councils, many local fire departments, destroyed hundreds of synagogues, houses, shops, and so on. This is the map you'll get on the Holocaust Museum website. It's a very good map. It's a very accurate map. Can you hear me? This is a map that I generate by going through books and representing each and every last one of them. When I do this, when I focus on the points, the individual points, we have more than 1,200 cities, towns, and villages. In each place, synagogues were burned, destroyed, or merely desecrated. In this map, we have basically the synagogues that were completely razed. But there were also other synagogues that, as I say, were somewhat destroyed or, as you see in the documents, merely desecrated. It is also true that in each case, we're talking about more than 1,200 towns and villages. The whole process was watched. From photos, we can see that whole villages gathered and that large crowds came together in towns and in cities. We can ask here, in this world, or in this evening, and actually stretched over a few days, 1,200 cities and towns and villages, how many resisted? How many helped Jews? There are some cases, but there are not many. We can count them on a few hands. I always think that the Holocaust happened in part because of deep-seated anti-Semitism in part because a regime came to power in 1933, the National Socialists, or the Nazis, that propagated a certain kind of hate against Jews and against others, including communists. In part, though, this also has to do with a society that let its government and its hate go unchecked. By 1938, it was 6 years into a racist state, and people had gotten used to it. They came to see resistance as futile. They did nothing. We can see these many, many dots and look closer. We can look at a place like Bavaria, which you see in the pink. And then we can look even closer into what was going on. We can see the balance between synagogues that were completely torn down, those that were merely desecrated. But we can begin to see on this map that if you lived in certain areas of Germany, there was no way to not see this. And there was no way that people didn't watch and watch closely. We can also dissolve this and look at questions like historians are interested in questions. Were they mainly Catholic towns? Were they mainly Protestant towns? Were they mainly rich towns? Were they mainly poor towns? I spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure out. And there's really no direct pattern. It is both Protestant towns and Catholic towns. It is both rich towns and poor towns. Then there was a war, the war, starting in 1939. When we think about the Holocaust, we have to think about that war. 99% of Jews killed in the Holocaust, actually more than that. More than 99% of Jews killed in the Holocaust are killed during the war. The war is something that makes the Nazi Empire, its concentration camps, the ghettos that it creates, a thing, a process that spreads all over Europe. This is a map I've made. The green dots are the concentration camps. The purple ones are Jewish ghettos. Almost all of those Jewish ghettos are liquidated. This map does not even yet include those places where mobile killing units rounded up Jews and simply shot them. So you can see the density of this historical phenomenon, how difficult it was to avoid it. There is no way that people who live here don't know what's going on. No way. There's just no way. From the start, the war took on the color of the November pogrom or of Kristallnacht, except now there was an army behind it. There was, as in Nazi Germany in 1938, in Poland in 1939, the burning down of synagogues, the humiliation of Jewish men and women, and the wanton killing. This is a picture of the Wehrmacht watching as a synagogue burns down, right at the start of the invasion. And this is a picture of Leni Riefenstahl, who some of you may know as the filmmaker who made a famous movie called Triumph of the Will. She's watching, horrified, as she comes to realize that Wehrmacht soldiers are gunning down a group of innocent Jewish men. In war, the dam of resistance to inhumanity is less sturdy. inhibitions are given cover. Beginning in 1940, ghettos were erected in Poland. We know a lot about the famous ones: Warsaw, Łódź, or Łódź, Krakow. We know much less about the many others, the smaller places, the individual points on this map, the towns, the villages, which were also made into ghettos, and where, incidentally, the majority of Jews in occupied Poland lived. Here, those coordinates, those points, help us to imagine and help us to ask the local questions. And what do we see? We see that even in small villages, Germans did not work alone. We see that keeping ghettos enclosed, keeping Jews from leaving, was a communal affair. And we see that the liquidation of the ghettos was an event much messier and much bloodier than the euphemism of liquidation suggests, in which many people participated. Yes, the SS. Yes, the German army. But also, unfortunately, it's against the law to say this at the moment, local Poles in almost every place. One must remember that Jews constituted roughly 10% of the population of pre-war Poland. Compare, African Americans constitute roughly 13% of the United States of America. Between 1941 and 1943, the Jews of Poland, that 10%, disappeared and were killed. Almost all of them. It is, when we look at these maps, almost impossible not to see it in its dimension. Just as, at the time, it was impossible for everyone living in this area not to see it. And just as, in villages, it was almost impossible for local Poles to resist going into the houses forcibly evacuated by Jews and enriching oneself. Almost impossible again in the villages to resist, in fact, taking over those houses. The largest transfer of immediate wealth and immediate housing, I would guess, in world history, I'm not an expert on how this looks in other parts, is actually in Eastern Europe, and it's bound up with the Holocaust. In no time do we ever see such a shift, because obviously those houses did not stand abandoned. The furs, the jewelry, the candlesticks, they were all taken, and they were taken more or less immediately. The local also shows us another thing. We now calculate that roughly 10% of Poles in these towns and villages that were going to be liquidated fought or went into hiding. That is to say, they resisted. Most, however, were killed in the so-called Jew hunts or turned in. 80% of them by local Poles. When the Poles turned them in, the Germans gave them clothes, furs, vodka, or just money. The close look, the local look, reminds us that it takes a village to save a population. It takes a village to eradicate a population. And it takes a village to help. That helping of neighbors, that was missing in Germany in 1938, 80 years ago. That was missing in Poland during the liquidations. They didn't have to turn them in. And that lack of local helping remains for me one of the most important negative lessons of the Holocaust. Thank you.
Hello. Dr. Smith, thank you for bringing us to that place today. Thank you very much. There are two reasons why today is so important to me. And again, thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day outside, and thank you for organizing. The first is because, unfortunately, anti-Semitism exists today. It looks different than it did in the 1930s and 1940s in Eastern Europe or the Middle East or even in the United States, but it still exists. And the second reason is because, and I quote Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, that hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Anti-Semitism is only secondarily about Jews. Primarily, it's about the failure of groups to accept responsibility for their own failures and to build their own future by their own endeavors. He writes, "No society that has fostered anti-Semitism has ever sustained liberty or human rights or religious freedom. Every society driven by hate begins by seeking to destroy enemies, but ends by destroying itself." So today I thought I would try to answer very quickly some of the 5 W's about anti-Semitism, the who, what, where, why, when, but I'm not going to get to all of them, just a few of them. Let's start with the why. Why is there anti-Semitism? And it's a question that I get a lot, phone calls and in presentations, why the Jews, why is there anti-Semitism? And I think one of the reasons that we're hated is because we're different. But lots of people are different. We're different, but we stick out. But lots of people stick out. We're different, and as a people, maybe we've stood in the face of the power of the day, be it in ancient times, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks, the Ottomans, the communists, you name it. Jews were the most conspicuous non-Christian minority in Christian Europe. Today, we're the most conspicuous non-Muslim presence in the Islamic Middle East. And in the United States, Jews and blacks and Catholics were, at a period, the most conspicuous non-Protestant minorities in the land. And so Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks writes, "Anti-Semitism has always been about the inability of a group to make space for difference. No group that adopts it can ever create a free society." And I'm going to come back to that at the end. But put simply, we're different. We're the most obvious group out there in a given moment. Now, the who is more tricky. It's not just tricky because of what you showed of the Catholics and Protestants and the rich and poor, but anti-Semites include groups from all lives and backgrounds, and it even includes Jews. Let me share a few personal vignettes with you, and that'll help with the who. My grandfather was born in Albany in 1911, and he was the son of a poor tailor. He attended Union College in Schenectady and then applied for medical school. The problem was that in those days, medical schools had strict quotas on Jews. It was hard to get into medical school if you were a Jew. So where did he go? He went to Vienna, Austria. When he came back from Vienna, Austria, the second hurdle was getting a residency in a hospital. Many hospitals wouldn't take Jews. Go to New York City and you'll find Mount Sinai, Beth Israel. Drive on the highway to Chicago, you'll pass Louisville, Jewish hospital all over the place. Hospitals wouldn't take Jewish doctors. Institutional anti-Semitism is now scarce, thanks to this great land, and it's illegal. Jews and Judaism have flourished in the United States, especially in the last 50 years. Here's a Nashville story of the Heller family. Some of you may know the Heller family. They were to buy a beautiful big white house in Belmont. In Belmont in the 1950s and 60s, if you were Jewish or black, you had a hard time buying property. And the house they wanted was on Belmont Boulevard. And so they were coming into the house, they were ready to put the down payment down, and someone from the neighborhood association came and said, "Are you Jewish?" And Gene, if you know Gene Heller, he looks very Jewish. That's another anti-Semitic stereotype right there. Looks very Jewish. And he said, "Yes, I'm Jewish." And the Belmont neighborhood representative said, "Well, Jews don't live here." He didn't say can't, he said don't live here. And so overnight, Gene and his creativity had the mailbox moved from Belmont Boulevard to the side street. And the next day he said, "We don't live, this house is not located on Belmont Boulevard. It's on whatever the side street was." It still exists. I remember walking to synagogue as a teen. I was 11 when my parents first let me walk to shul on Shabbat by myself down Troy Schenectady Road. And it was not uncommon for me to hear anti-Semitic slurs out the window. I always dismissed them. They're hillbillies. They're rednecks, whoever they are, pardon the jargon. We should feel bad for them. We were taught they're probably poor and uneducated. But is that an excuse? A word about religious anti-Semitism, because it would be easy for me to talk about Muslim anti-Semitism, because as a Jew, I know many neighborhoods I could go to in Israel, particularly in the West Bank, where I would not be so welcome. If I wore my yarmulke, I'd probably be beaten up and possibly even killed. Not to say that most Muslims are anti-Semitic, God forbid. A bunch of places in Europe too. London has its known neighborhoods. France, they say one should not go with their yarmulke in much of Europe these days. But since we're in America, a few words about American religious anti-Semitism. I'll say a word about Christian anti-Semitism. Through our years in Nashville, we've been blessed to have many friends in the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community. Christians, other Muslims, Baha'is, non-believers, Buddhists, some of no particular faith. And these friends are no different than our Jewish friends in the sense that they're dear to us. We value their friendship and their closeness, and they value ours, and I can't think of anything we wouldn't do for them. And so a few years back, I find myself in a large Christian church to attend the funeral of one of the matriarchs of a particular family friend. Now, if you've ever been to a Jewish funeral before, they're pretty simple. You're lucky if you get a couple psalms out of the rabbi and a beautiful eulogy and some words of comfort. But this was far from a Jewish service, and at this particular day, the pastor shared for a few moments about the deceased, about his belief and faith, and then went on to spend no less than 1/2 hour about the importance of the belief in Christ and the failures and dangers of non-believers. He quoted verses from the New Testament about Jews, derogatory verses from a various gospel, and I knew I was in a sanctuary of believers, of honest, good people, but I wondered if the pastor had ever met real Jews before, and wondered why he would choose these scriptures that portray the Jews in such a negative way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the pastor for what it says in the New Testament, but I am blaming him for highlighting those particular verses. I wouldn't label the church or the pastor as anti-Semitic. Maybe you would, but there were certainly those undertones. Let's talk politics for a minute. It's too hard to talk about Trump, so we'll talk about Obama. You can appreciate or not appreciate the presidency of Barack Obama. You don't have to show me. Don't nod your head or anything like that. There were certain issues that I agreed with President Obama and certain issues that I disagree with. And I think that's how it should be with any president. But the fact that Obama and Michelle sat for years in the church of Reverend Jeremiah Wright, listening him spew anti-Semitic hate speech that you can see on YouTube week after week, was alarming for me. The fact that President Obama could tolerate and even appreciate his pastor, who eventually married him and Michelle, and not be labeled an anti-Semite himself, surprised me and disappointed me. And now that we're on campus, a few words about campus life. I find in college campuses, I used to think there were two extremes. There were the college kids who were extremely self-absorbed. College is just about me. It's making myself better. I want to become smarter. I want to become stronger. I want to do whatever is good for me. And this plays out in academics in terms of getting into the best classes, getting the best grades, getting the teachers you want, doing whatever it takes. It can play out socially in terms of partying, and there's no partying at Belmont, obviously, or social climbing. We know the kids who are self-absorbed to the extreme. And to a certain degree, don't we encourage it? Isn't that what college is about? Building yourself up? And the other extreme is, I'm going to say, the kids who want to save the world. Nothing else matters. My life doesn't matter. My academic time here doesn't matter. I've picked my cause, and nothing else is nearly as important in my life. And unfortunately, one of those causes in North America, particularly in schools with lots of Jewish students, has become in vogue to criticize Israel. Not just to criticize Israel, because that's okay, but to bully those who love and support Israel. Professors ridiculing students who love Israel in the name of academia and scholarship. Student groups who use verbal and physical intimidation against Jewish student groups who support Israel. Students should be free to express their opinions, but not at the cost of their security and comfort moving around a college campus. Here are some obvious concerns about these student groups who criticize Israel. Number one, most can't find Israel on a map and don't know the basic history of Israel. Number two, most haven't opened their eyes wide enough to discover that there are international perpetrators of human rights throughout the world that make Israel, America, Canada, Australia, and all the democracies look angelic. Number three, most have shown no real or even imagined concern for the Palestinian people, who are Israel's neighbors, which is their alleged call to action in the first place. And I just want to finish with the what to do. I said hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. The antidote to anti-Semitism is the same antidote to bigotry and to racism and to all hatred, really. It's learning how to make room for the other and not stopping at tolerance. Tolerance is a very big word in our society right now, and I don't think tolerance is enough. Tolerance is a starting point, but we have to reach further towards respect and understanding and even love. Sometimes we take our kids downtown Nashville, to the streets, and I wear my yarmulke downtown. And sometimes my wife walks 10 feet behind me just to see who's staring at me and who's pointing at me. And sometimes people will say, "Are you Jewish?" And I say, "Yeah, how did you know?" And they say, "We love the Jewish people," which is wonderful. They love the Jewish people because that's what they're taught, and that's what it says in the Bible. But is that kind of love good enough? And I would venture to say it's not good enough. In the memory of the 6 million and more who perished in the Holocaust, we come together today. But millions more are dying around the world. Rwanda happened in my lifetime. Darfur happened in my lifetime. And it was on this campus, when I first came to town, that I had the privilege of attending a rally for Darfur. Syria is happening right now. As individuals, as families, as communities, we can get together to mourn and to learn and to commit to action. But as a country and as a world, we still have much more work to do. Thank you.
Pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon, and my only regret is having to follow Rabbi Saul Strasberg here, who, as usual, is a very tough act to follow for good reason. Thank you for the privilege of being here on this afternoon. Because this is a community grounded in faith, let me begin by some words that we share from both of our traditions, both of which can be found in the first book of the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian scriptures as well. Right there, we find in the opening verses, in the opening chapters, before there was a Jewish people, before there was a Christian people, when there simply existed the earliest rubrics of humanity, God asks a question to those who represent all of collective humanity, and a few verses further on, it is a human being that asks the first question of our Creator. After partaking of the forbidden fruit, both Adam and Eve have a sense of shame, and they flee, they hide from God. And God says, in speaking to Adam in particular, "Where are you?" And part of our tradition suggests this: if there really is a God who is all-seeing and all-knowing and all-wise, then why does God need to ask that question in the first place? Does God not possess vision beyond what Superman might possess with X-ray vision? Is God unable to actually search and locate where Adam might be in the Garden of Eden? Rather, the question perhaps that God is asking, in the view of our tradition, is not physically, "Where are you?" but spiritually, "Where are you?" Where were you? Where do you stand, and why do you stand there? And for what do you stand? And to amplify that question further, it might be, do you not realize as well before whom you stand? That's the opening question that God asks all of humanity. And a few verses later, it is man in the form of Cain who asks God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the implied answer is, if not you, then who? Of course you are your brother's keeper and protector and shield and voice of conscience. The question at the time of the Holocaust, the central question, is the same question we might ask ourselves today. And that is, where are we? Where do we find ourselves, our stance, our voice, at times when it is uncomfortable to find that voice, to stand tall for that which is what we say we believe in, to find the divine image not only in us, but in our neighbor, and to stand up for them as well as for us. And of course, the follow-up to that holds true as well today. Am I my brother's keeper? And if not us, then who? To use the words of a different rabbi who lived long before Rabbi Saul and even long before me, Rabbi Hillel, if not now, then when? If we are not our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors' keeper and protector and shield, if we are not so at moments of peril for them and for humanity, then when? I think one of the questions that a Christian university must continue to ask itself is where you find faith, not just for personal salvation, with all due respect, not to seek the salvation for yourselves collectively, with all due respect, not to seek to implore others who are not members of the Christian faith about concern for their salvation. But with all due respect, the question is, Where do you find your conscience, your religious courage to stand up for your neighbors, not in spite of your faith, but because your faith demands no less of you? Jesus, who lived as a proud Jew, who died proud of who he was, lived his life and gave his life in the belief that every human soul was created in God's image, worthy of God's love, and therefore certainly worthy of our love. I would argue that is the challenge for every human being created today. It's a lesson to be taught on every Christian campus, to be lived in every Christian church, to be taught from every Christian pulpit. With all due respect, you know, some of our greatest moments at our congregation occur each year when for 3 weeks in a row, a trinity, if you will, we invite Professor Amy Jill Levine, the professor of New Testament Studies at Vanderbilt University, to come speak to a room, a Jewish sanctuary, filled with 300 or 400 or 500 people in the dead of winter, 80% of whom are Christians, to speak about our shared tradition because of one Jew, Jesus, to speak of that shared tradition and the lessons drawn from that shared tradition where they are still shared, where those lessons respectfully disagree, but to sit in the same room together and to learn from this modern Orthodox, this open Orthodox Jewish woman, this professor of New Testament studies, in a room filled, a sanctuary, a Jewish sanctuary, filled mostly with non-Jews, about that which we share. Think about the impossibility, the implausibility of that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, let alone in the city of Belmont, which was a restricted community on the land which formerly was designated as slave quarters for that plantation, right next door to the temple. It's an extraordinary moment in the life of Jewish-Christian relationships. We who are in the buckle of the Bible Belt, in the flyover states, we have much to teach the world, much to teach this country about what we may yet aspire to be. You can't be in the religion business, unless I am wrong, unless you are filled more with hope than with despair. Those evenings to me are those moments where we create sacred earth, sacred ground, where we share the finest hopes and dreams of our tradition, despite the pain that has sometimes been shared between our traditions. Holocaust Remembrance Day is about remembering what happens when we forget where we are in the core of our being. We forget who are our brother's keepers. And we have to contemplate the difficult question of what we would do, what we would have done then in the shadow of Nazi persecution, and to Rabbi Strasberg's message, what we would do today when we know human intolerance continues in this world of ours, and we have choices to make about standing tall or sitting still or kneeling before false idols. Two last comments with your permission. I am here today because of two factors. One is the grace of God, and the other is the accidental fortune of history. My mother's family left from Vienna. They were able to get passage to Shanghai, China, one of the few remaining ports open to members of the Jewish people. There she met my father, who fled from Germany. He fled from Germany despite the fact that his father was a war hero for Germany in the First World War. He left behind two brothers and a mother who refused to believe that the inevitable was happening in arguably the most cultured, well-educated community on the face of the earth in that century. The Viennese would only argue that they were more cultured, more well-educated. They met in Shanghai, China, in a ghetto that housed an estimated 25 to 40,000 Jews during the war. They met there, they married there in the one synagogue, now a museum, that still stands there. They stayed there during the duration of the war. They were able to come to the United States in 1947 to begin a new life because of a connection to an old childhood boyfriend of my mother who was willing to sign an affidavit that he would guarantee their livelihood and that they would not be a burden to the United States. Their son in this wonderful land had the opportunity to go to rabbinic school, to continue on the legacy of the Jewish people, and their son in this lifetime has been able to take pastors to Israel, has been able to have gatherings at a temple in Nashville where Jews and Christians gather together, and is able to tell the story of hope because the citizens of this land eventually came to understand that they could not shield themselves from Nazi Germany and its potential tyranny to envelop all the civilized nations of the world. I am profoundly grateful every single day for the blessings of this land and the courage of its people. The last thing I want to address is the realities of the security and survival of the homeland of the Jewish people. By no means perfect, by no means without problem. In the Middle East today, there is one place, whether you go as far to the west as Morocco or as far to the east as ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, there is only one place where Christians can practice their religion openly, freely, safely, and securely, without risk from harm because of what they believe. That place is in the homeland of the Jewish people, the state of Israel. In a bandwidth of literally 10,000 miles, there is one place and one country. That tells you something about the Jewish soul, about its ability collectively to answer the question, where are you? And are you your brother's keeper? Here's the last thing I want to say, and I say it with a very sober note. What we are witnessing in the Middle East today, right over the border from the Jewish homeland, right over the border from the one place that protects the remaining Christian community with vigilance, there is a rogue nation with a rogue leader, with the support of other nations, that is bombing its own people. Innocent civilians who are being bombed with chemical weapons. This rogue nation, those nations who support it, they are targeting this innocent population, purposely aiming at schools and hospitals. To the Jewish people, the introduction of chemical gas to target and destroy innocent human life, this is a very painful echo on this week of remembrance of the Holocaust. The fact that it happens right across the border from the Jewish homeland brings this home to every Jew on the planet and should concern every single one of us. To the Jewish people and those brethren and sisters within the Jewish homeland, they ask themselves today yet one more difficult question, and that is this: if a rogue nation with the support of other nations is willing to target the innocent of its own citizenry, what makes the citizens of Israel think that they will not be targeted by this rogue nation against whom they view as the enemy right over the border? That is the reality of what the state of Israel and those who love it wrestle with this week and this Holocaust Remembrance Day as well. For our people, and quite frankly, for your people, and for all people who crave human decency and human dignity, that is the question we should carry in our own hearts. Where are we? Are we our brother's keepers? And if not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Now I have to follow you. It's an honor to be here, and I must first thank Barbara Massey Rogers for making this possible for us to be here today, and what an honor it is to be able to speak on this special day. Dr. Lake, thank you for pulling this together, and I want to thank those of you on this beautiful day, as Rabbi Saul said, that you chose to be here. This is an important message, and I want to talk a little bit about my mission and why I do what I do. Dr. Smith, I so appreciate your questions that you asked yourself, because I found myself in a very similar situation. I am the president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Our mission is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of global anti-Semitism again. I never would have thought in my lifetime that I would see the rise of anti-Semitism like what we're witnessing today. When I first started this mission, of course, my husband, who just stepped out the door, who is a two-time Emmy Award-winning director, God brought us together for such a time as this, to be able to use the communication tool of this generation, media, to wake up not just my generation, but the generation to come. And for those of you, the younger people, the millennials, the Gen Xers in the audience, thank you so much for being here. I don't know if this is required for you to be, but I'm glad you're here, because my message is to you. When I first started our mission at Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, I asked very similar questions to what Dr. Smith asked. I looked at Nazi Germany, and I realized that Germany was a Christian nation. It was an educated nation. It even gave rise to the Reformation movement. So where was the church? How could not just 6 million Jews be murdered, but another 5.5 million other people? And could it happen again today? So I sought out to use media to produce award-winning programs and documentary films and distribute those films around the globe. I serve on the President's Council of the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and that provides us the platform to reach 2.6 billion viewers globally with our message. But I didn't just stop there, because I was also afforded the opportunity to serve as a special envoy at the United Nations for the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, because Archbishop Dr. John Lapoli also had great concern about the growing anti-Semitism at the United Nations. When I started this quest, we started with a documentary called The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust, and I do have several copies available if anyone is interested. But I asked the question, as Dr. Smith did, where is the church? If the church would sit by and allow 6 million Jews to be targeted, will it happen today in our country? If we look at Nazi Germany, at the time when Hitler rose to power, Germany was an educated Christian nation. Look at the United States of America. Could it happen here? As Dr. Smith mentioned, we've seen a rise of anti-Semitism. The ADL, Anti-Defamation League, reported an almost 60 to 70% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States of America. We're not 70 years out from the rebirth of in fact, we're celebrating in a couple of weeks the rebirth of the modern state of Israel, as the prophets foretold. We're 80 years out from Kristallnacht, where the Jews were targeted. How can it happen, and can it happen again today? We look at the polls in our country, and if you poll Americans, 70% of Americans support the state of Israel in her war on terror. We understand. So where is the increase of anti-Semitism at almost 70%? Where is it coming from? It's coming from our college campuses. It's coming from now on our secondary school campuses. Why? Because we are indoctrinating our children once again with propaganda. The Holocaust didn't happen in a vacuum. In fact, prior to Hitler coming to power, in the universities of higher learning, the professors were already teaching that the Jews were a subversive people, that they were different. It began in the halls of academia, and that's why we are here today, to speak to you all, to speak to the next generation. If we are going to eradicate anti-Semitism, it's going to happen because of our young people. And I love speaking to the millennials. I was just in South Florida at Florida Atlantic University. We screened one of our documentary films on the whole boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And it was amazing to see the students who came forward after they saw the film and said, wow, I learned things I didn't know. I didn't realize that this was going on. There are groups on college campuses that are fueling the hatred once again. They are using the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement to legitimize their hatred, to use the argument against the state of Israel to justify their hatred of the Jewish students and the Christian Zionist students on campuses now. So we have to ask ourselves, what will we do? We started this organization as an educational tool. And we are traveling now across the country, speaking on college campuses, screening our documentary films like we did at FAU, having forums like this one here at Belmont to have this conversation. Just here in Tennessee, we ask ourselves, well, I don't see the evidence of that going on. I don't see the evidence of anti-Semitism. Let me tell you what just happened this year. In Tennessee, the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. The community rabbi, you mentioned, or Rabbi Saul mentioned about Christians or people on the street saying, we love the Jews. Well, that's nice. But where's the action? Faith without works is no faith at all. And we can say that we love the Jewish people, but if we're not going to stand up. This year, the second year in a row, we introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in our state legislature. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is basically the definition of what is anti-Semitism. The U.S. State Department uses the definition to determine or to document anti-Semitic incidents around the world. So you would think Tennessee, belt buckle of the Bible Belt, Christians in the state legislature, right? This should be a no-brainer. We should be able to get this passed. Well, for the second year in a row, that bill was sent to the Black Hole Education Subcommittee to be killed once again. Also this year, I don't know if you heard this, there was a resolution that was introduced to condemn the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists in the state of Tennessee. And guess what? It didn't see the light of day either. How many of you are aware that this was going on in our state legislature? If we are going to change the culture, it starts with us. And we can't just sit back and say, it doesn't affect me, because it will affect us. That was so beautifully illustrated, Rabbi, how you talked about the state of Israel. There is no other safe place in the Middle East for Christians, not just Christians, Druze, Bedouins, to live safely, even Muslims, securely in the state of Israel. One of the events that we hosted at Florida Atlantic University was a panel discussion by a group called Reservists on Duty. There were no Jews in this group of IDF reservists. They were all young men and women who were Christian, Muslim, Druze, and Bedouin. And they talked about the state of Israel as their country. They talked about how, as women, as young women, the rights and the opportunities provided for them by the Israeli government would not be provided to them in any of the surrounding Muslim countries. The young men talked about how they love living in Israel because they wouldn't have the rights they have in any of the other countries. And that's why they were willing to put on a uniform and fight to defend their country, their freedoms, their way of life, their families. If the United States, if we can't protect our Jewish communities, where will our Jewish communities be safe? We are the land of the free, and we are the home of the brave. And I hope that as we contemplate and we consider this day, that we're not just here to just remember. We're here to ask ourselves, what will we do? What can we do? I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Winston Churchill. I don't know if any of you have seen The Darkest Hour, but I would encourage you. He said, "There comes a special moment in everyone's life, a moment for which the person was born. That special opportunity, when he seizes it, will fulfill his mission, a mission for which he or she is uniquely qualified. In that moment, he finds greatness. It is his finest hour." God has raised us up, ladies and gentlemen, for such a time as this. And we're not sitting in this room because we chose to be here. Yes, you chose, but that decision was chosen a long time ago. For you to hear this message and for you to ask yourselves what you will do. I thank you so much again for being here and for taking the time to remember and to ask yourselves what role you will play in this, what could be your finest hour. God bless you all. Thank you so much for hosting this, Todd. Thank you.
Let's thank them again. That was really, really amazing. Questions? Yes.
How can we as entertainers and people within the creative industry contribute to stabilizing the Middle East without leaving the whole world blind and supporting, the destruction and killing of individuals? Because in the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, we're taught to have compassion for these individuals and to value human life. So what's the happy medium, and how can we start, achieving those small wins as entertainers and creators, collaborating with people like you?
Thank you so much. That was a great question. And I'm glad you're here, because one of the next campaigns, programs that we're initiating at Proclaiming Justice to the Nations is looking for interns to start grooming the next generation, to take this message to future generations. But really the key comes back to utilizing your talent and thinking of ways that you can communicate. Are you going to be producing film, directing? What is your focus?
I think just the art of story, right? Yeah. Using story as a vehicle for change within people and society.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because we saw the image of Leni Riefenstahl, who was Hitler's greatest communicator, propagandist. And I've never seen that photo before. It was shocking to see that she was shocked that what she had created, she created a monster through her media. Never discredit the impact of media and the role that it plays, because you can convince people to believe a lie by the way you present. And when I produced The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust, it really came out of a desire to do research, much like what Dr. Smith did, pursuing and asking the questions. How could this happen? In Poland, how many of you know it's illegal now in Poland to even mention like what Dr. Smith mentioned? So I would encourage you, for those of you who are in communications and media and entertainment, I would love to talk to you. We are looking for interns to help groom and help prepare the storytellers of the future generations.
I think on that we'll end our time, and let's thank our panel for this wonderful presentation. Outstanding. Outstanding. Let me say a word of thanks to Barbara Massey Rogers, who is one of our trustees, and thank you for helping make this possible. Let me thank all of you for coming and let you know that Lori Cardozo-Moore has brought not only friends from the organization, but also information, and you can pick that up here and have an opportunity to learn more about her group. Thanks again for being here.